Well, good morning, North Point family. How are you doing? Oh man, it is so good to be with you. My name is Michael Voll. I'm the lead pastor here at North Point. I am glad that you have joined us, whether you're here at our Northwest campus, if you're joining us online at our Vegreville campus or at our Northeast campus. We are just very glad that you're here. And we are in the middle of a series where it's called The Story that makes sense of our stories. And we're looking at Genesis, the first book in the Bible. We're looking specifically at chapters 1 through 11. Now, last week, we talked about what it means to be human. What in the world does it mean to be human? Well, to be human is to be in relationship with a relational God. So we're to be in relationship with the earth, with ourselves, with others, and most importantly, we are to be in relationship with God. Now, what if the entire human story hinged on just one choice? What if the entire human story hinged on just one choice, just one command? What if fullness of life or the shadow of death began with one single decision? Well, that's the moment that we step into today. And as we're going to see today, this all hinges on one command that we're going to explore in depth. Now, I want to just give you a little bit of a warning. Today is a little bit more of a teach. Now, normally on the weekend, you see me in preach mode, but there is a whole lot of stuff that I've got to unpack for you. And so I'm just going to give you a warning. This is a little bit more of a teach than it is a preach. But how many of you know that I get a little bit of excited sometimes? Sometimes I get a little bit passionate. So who knows where this is going to go? We'll see by the end, and you can tell me what it was. Well, we want to start off in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die." You will certainly die. You know, when I was a kid, I'd often help my dad do some yard work and odd jobs at his shop. My dad was a diesel mechanic. He owned a diesel repair shop. And so you can imagine at this shop, there was a lot of shrapnel. There was a lot of metal. You know, my dad would, maybe redo, an engine, and the old block would be outside. And there were these piles. But of course, there was still some grass that need to be mowed. And here I am, I'm 8 or 9 years old. My dad takes out our old red Toro, push mower. He teaches me, how to pull that push mower, how to get it started. And my dad had only one job for me. He said, "Michael, do not get too close to these metal piles. I don't want you to run over any metal whatsoever." And I was like, yeah. Okay. I'll do it. I didn't do it. Friends, I'm here to tell you that I hit a piece of metal. And when that blade that was going at probably a couple thousand RPM, when it hit that metal, it stopped dead on, broke the crankshaft, and it broke my dad's heart, and it may have broke my butt. I don't know. I can't remember quite frankly what happened there. But I only had one job. And I kind of messed that up. Well, in the very beginning of the book of Genesis, we see that humanity, Adam and Eve, they were free to eat from any tree in the garden, any tree in the garden. Friends, this is millions, probably tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of trees. As far as the eye can see, it's all yours. God says, go for it. Man, the world, the garden is your oyster. I want you to know today, God is not stingy. Maybe you have this idea that God is stingy. He's trying to withhold from you, and that is not the case at all. Right from the very beginning, God has never been stingy. He is crazy generous. But there's only one prohibition. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil located in the center of the garden. Adam and Eve had one job. They had one command from God. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, some theologians people who study God, they would suggest that there really is only one command in the Bible. That this is the only command in the Bible that God gives, that every other command actually flows from this or speaks directly from this command. Now, up until this point, in Genesis chapter 1, we actually see, and you've probably never thought of it this way, that God actually gives many creative commands to this point. There are many creative commands of God. I mean, we see in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, let there be light. And then in verse 6, let there be a vault between the waters that separate from the water. And then in verse 9, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place and let the dry ground appear. In verse 11, let the land produce vegetation. In 14, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate day from night. Are you kind of getting where I'm coming from here? There's creative commandments, and they go on. In verse 20, let the water teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. In verse 22, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. In verse 24, let the land produce livestock and creatures and wild animals. In verse 26, let us make mankind in our own image. And then in verse 28, be fruitful and increase in number. This is what humanity is told. Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. One could make a pretty good case that these are actually the original 10 commandments. These are the original 10 commandments. Now, these aren't numbered like the 10 commandments that were given to Moses on Sinai. But what they really do is they reflect God's life-giving choice. God is commanding these things to be, and it is reflecting his life-giving choice. You see, the 10 commandments that were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, hundreds of years after this, they actually make it possible to experience the fullness and freedom of these original commandments in Genesis chapter 1. So God says, let all of this happen. Let all of this goodness happen. Remember, God said after he created everything, he said, it is very good. It is very good. And it's out of the 10 commandments given to Moses that if we would follow those commands significantly, and maybe most importantly, that we shall have no gods before him. If we would actually do those things, friends, then we would understand the fullness of God and his creation. We would understand the fullness. You know, when the 10 commandments are given in Deuteronomy chapter 30, 15, and 16, we see this. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. See this, if we will follow those commands of God, he wants to bring blessing. He wants to bring freedom. He wants to bring life if we will follow after God. You see, humanity is set to thrive. We were actually created to thrive, friends. God doesn't want to hold us down. He doesn't want to pin us down. He doesn't want to keep fun from us. We are set to thrive if we will follow God in both his creative commands and any other prohibitions that he may have. Now, sometimes we will understand the reason behind these prohibitions, and other times we won't. But if we will trust God, if we will trust him that he has created all things and that any command of his is good, friends, we will thrive. Now, before we dive into the significance where we are going to camp out today, the significance of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I want us to look at another tree that we're introduced to in the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, it says, the Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we see this right off the bat. We're not given much of a description of the tree of life initially. So here in Genesis, we're not given much of a description of what this tree of life is all about, but we do know that it does represent life and this unending communion between humanity and God. That this tree is this living representative. It's a visible symbol of God's life-giving presence with humanity. Because you will know if you've read through the beginning of Genesis that God walks and he talks with humanity. He is in relationship with humanity. He has this unending communion with humanity. And the tree of life is representative of that you can have life and you can have communion with God. Now, German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he really does help us see this. He says, listen, the tree of life wasn't tempting to Adam because Adam already had life. Like, why does God not have to put a prohibition? Don't eat of the fruit of the tree of life. Why does he not have to do that? Well, Bonhoeffer says the reason he doesn't have to do that is Adam already has life. He already has communion with God. What he doesn't have is the knowledge of good and evil. You see, this isn't a temptation for Adam and Eve because of the life that they already have, because of the communion they already have. But what they don't have is the knowledge of good and evil. We always seem to desire what we don't have, don't we? Like, what is it about humanity? It's like, if we don't have it, we want it, even if we don't really want it. If we don't have it, we want it. You know, you can be walking along and you're just enjoying the day. It's like, man, it's a sunny day, you know, and you're just like, you're just drinking it in, you know, just loving it. And then someone rides by on a bicycle and you're like, well, that was quick. Well, I want a bicycle. Well, why do I have to be walking? Well, I could have a bicycle, right? And then you get a bicycle and you're like, this is so much faster and so much more fun. And then someone rips by on one of those e-bikes, right? And you're like, well, why can't I have an e-bike? That'd be much more fun, and they don't even have to pedal. And then you go by an e-bike, right? And now you're just going like that. You're just gunning it, right? And you go by, and then all of a sudden, what do you see? You see someone in a Corvette, and you're like, I want a Corvette. I don't have a car, right? And you get a Corvette, and then that's not enough because you see someone ripping by in a helicopter, and you want a helicopter. You get a helicopter, and you think, man, this is amazing. And someone cruises by in their private jet, and you're like, oh my goodness, I need a private jet. You get a private jet, and before long, you want to go into space with Elon Musk, SpaceX, let's go. Right? We always want what we don't have. And because humanity longed for and grasped what they weren't supposed to, that unity, that communion that they once had, it was lost. You know what's crazy is that often what we do have, we lose when we pine after what we don't have to. And for Adam and Eve, their relationship with God is lost. Now, thanks be to God, there is hope around the corner. Because the tree of life actually reappears at the very end of the book of Revelation. And it appears in the New Jerusalem, and it talks all about this idea of eternal relationship with God being restored. Friends, there is a time when our relationship with God is going to be restored, but I'm going to get to that in a bit. But maybe you're here today, maybe you're watching online or you're at one of our campuses, and you're thinking, well, why in the world would God give a prohibition anyways? I mean, everything was good. Why does God have to make a rule? Why does God have to make a law? And actually, you're a little bit angry because you're like, I think things were really good, but then God has to go and wreck it and say, don't eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the center of the garden. And you're like, of course they're going to do it. And maybe you're even just, well, why can't I eat from that? Why can't I eat from the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Why can't I? This is unfair. This is unreasonable. It's unloving. It's unjust. And I guess I would ask the question, is it? Like, is it unloving? Is it unreasonable? Is it unfair? Is it unjust? I don't think so. I don't think so. You see, I believe that this command was a boundary for our protection. This command was a boundary for our protection. I want you to consider that God, our creator, has given us everything we need to live complete lives. He designed us. He knows what's good for us. Now, you can be told by a wilderness survival specialist that a certain berry, though it looks very delicious and you are very snacky, that wilderness specialist can say, I know we've been on this long hike. I know we're 10 kilometers in. I know you got your sweat on. I know you got a little bit of grumble in your tummy, but please do not eat that berry because there's going to be more than a grumble in your tummy. I'm going to tell you there's going to be a rumble in the jungle. It's going to be really bad. It's going to be bad for you. And you can go, what do they know? Like, what if they know? Like, do they know my stomach? Like, I got a real hardcore stomach. And so what do? You just gulp it down. It's like, it's going to get real. It's going to get real. You see, God created us and God can make the rules. He created the universe. He created everything in it, including the laws of physics that govern the world. He knows the world. He knows how it works, and he knows how we work best. Can you imagine like the game of hockey without rules? Or can you imagine if the game of hockey where the rules just changed just at the whim and fancy of the players? It's like I don't care about offside. I don't care about icing. I don't care about high sticking. I mean, friends, it would cease to be hockey. I mean, it would just look more like playoff hockey, wouldn't it? It would cease to be hockey. It would be kind of like the gladiator games. It would actually take the enjoyment out of the game of hockey. If you take the rules out of the game of hockey, then it's just a gladiatorial sport. God knows what's best for us, and he's doing all of this to protect us. So he does it for our protection, but the command was also for our freedom and for our flourishing. You see, boundaries aren't just protective, they're also life-giving. And God gives us this command for our good. If you eat this fruit, you will die. Now, I want you to know something. God didn't say, if you eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, I'll kill you. God didn't say that. Some of us believe he said that, but he didn't say that. He said, if you eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will die. You see, God won't need to punish us. It'll just be a natural consequence of our decision to disobey. Just natural consequence. Naturally, it will lead to death sooner or later. I mean, parenting with natural consequences overall is actually a reasonably good idea. I mean, within reason, if you allow your kids just to feel a little bit of the natural consequence, it actually isn't the worst idea. And you can be told by a parent, don't touch that stove. But I mean, mom and dad are as dumb as a bag of hammers, aren't they? I mean, what do mom and dad know? I mean, I am 2.5 years old. I'm almost 3. They don't get ovens. They don't understand ovens like I understand them. But the parent knows it's going to hurt. Please, 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 please don't do it. And when they do, the waterworks start and the polysporin comes out and hugs are administered generously. Parents don't give commands because they're killjoys. Good parents don't give commands because they're killjoys. They know the pitfalls and they're steering their kids away from trouble into peace. And anything that God commands us to do is for our flourishing. It's actually for our freedom. But this command was also a test of trust. It was a test of trust because ultimately God respects us. Man, God respects us way more than I would respect anyone. God creates us as free and rational beings. We are made in the image of God, which means if we're made in the image of God, it means that we can make moral choices. We can actually make moral choices. Because I want you to know today is that love without choice isn't love. If someone makes you love them, friends, it is something different. That is not love, is it? Now, theologian Darrell Johnson, he's pointed out that this is very risky for God. It's very risky for God to do this because God creates this beautiful world. And then he placed within it a creature that can choose. A creature that can choose to do good or choose to do what is not good. Now, I can only imagine what it's like for a homeowner. They buy a home and they go in and they They gut out the carpets and they paint the walls and they put a new kitchen in and everything's gleaming and shining. And they decide, we're going to rent this out. This is going to help pay some of our bills. And so they go through the interview process with a whole bunch of people. And this one person is like, oh man, like I am so good. Every place I've been in, I've taken care of it. And in that moment, friends, that homeowner has to decide, will this home be treated well or will it be returned in ruins? Like how is it going to be treated? Because you don't know. Let's be clear about what the tree of knowledge of good and evil is and what it's not. So what is it? And what is it not? It's not a choice between good and evil. It's one tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is one tree. You see, God didn't place an evil tree in the middle of the garden. God would never do that. He would never, ever, ever do that. He didn't do it. He won't do it. It's also not the tree of knowledge. A lot of times we shorten up the name, and for many years I've done that, and I've just called it the tree of knowledge. But what happens is when you shorten the name, all of a sudden there is an idea that gets planted in your head. It's a mistaken abbreviation. We must say the whole name, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Say my name, say my name. Okay, can you do that? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Come on, be with me. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You see, when we shorten it, we think that God is against humanity gaining knowledge. And God is not against knowledge. That is not true. God actually wants us to grow in knowledge. He wants us to grow in wisdom. In fact, the whole of the book of Proverbs is dedicated to this. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." You see, we need knowledge. And trusting in God is the very starting point. But the knowledge of good and evil refers to a kind of knowledge that only God can have and still live. Listen to me. It refers to a knowledge that only God can have and still live because it's about moral autonomy. It's claiming the right to define what's good and evil for yourself. It's saying, I know what's good and evil. I can define what is right. And only God can do that. Theologian Daniel Fuller says, the command not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil would then mean that Adam and Eve were not to aspire to that maturity possessed only by God. You see, God doesn't want them to grow into that maturity because he knows they're unable to do it, whereby they might consider themselves to be independent of him and able to enjoy a fulfilled life by taking matters into their own hands. When we eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what we're basically saying is we don't need God. I can make moral choices by myself. I can be independent of God, and I can enjoy a fulfilled life without God. I can take matters into my own hands. And how many of you know that that's what we've done as humanity? That's how we're living. You see, when Adam and Eve signed their declaration of independence from God, they didn't become free. When they threw the tea into the ocean, friends, they signed their death warrant. It wasn't about freedom in that moment. It wasn't about freedom in that moment at all. They signed their death warrant. Rather than relying on God's design, they become ruled by forces beneath their dignity. And here we are in 2025, still saying, we want independence. We want freedom to do whatever we want. And do you know what it's doing, friends? It's not making us more human. It's making us less human. You see, our culture says, just follow your heart. Oh, just follow your heart. Friends, I want you to know the heart is deceitful. In fact, Proverbs says there's a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. How many times have you followed your heart and it absolutely led you to terrible places? But I was just following my heart. And right now, that's what we think, that if we follow our heart, it's going to lead to good places. You see, God hasn't given these commands to trap us. He has given us guardrails to guide us. He wants you to move forward. He wants you to enjoy the road. He wants you to enjoy the journey, but he's putting up guardrails because he knows that there's a cliff beyond this, and he doesn't want you to fall off. Thankfully, though, Adam and Eve chose the wrong tree. See, they chose the wrong tree. Rather than just being content with the tree of life, of having communion with God, they chose the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But thanks be to God, there is another tree. Friends, there is a third tree, and that is the tree of the cross. That is the tree of the cross. In 1 Peter 2, verse 24, it says, he himself, that is Jesus, bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds, you have been healed. By his wounds, you've been healed. You see, because Jesus chose the hardest, the most painful tree, the cross, we can again have access to the tree of life. Because I want you to know that when Adam and Eve, when they chose the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what ended up happening is that communion between them and God was broken off. And in fact, we see when Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, that all of a sudden there is a guardrail put around the tree of life because they no longer have communion with God. They are separated from God because they chose to go their own way. You see, they chose to try to be adults, to try to be mature on their own. But we can be restored to our childlike ways before we were exposed to the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Jesus makes this very clear in Matthew 18, verse 3. He says, truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. I want you to know that children are dependent. They're dependent. This isn't a call to be childish. God doesn't want us to be childish. He wants us to be childlike. That we would be dependent on God, that we would see our need of God, that we would be connected with God and see that when we are connected to him, the very fruit that we were looking for when we reached out to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is found when we are connected to God, that we can actually have fruit in our lives. In fact, Jesus said in John 15:5, he said, I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. 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 I want you to know today that through Jesus Christ, we can have life and communion with God. Friends, so much of our lives is trying to say, I'm grown up enough. I don't need God. I can make up my own rules. I can make up my own morality. Don't tell me what to do, Pastor. Don't tell me what to do, God. I'm doing my own thing. And where has it got us? We're reaching out for fruit because we are fruitless in our lives. We're reaching out for something that will never satisfy because God has created us in his image and he wants us to be able to be dependent upon him. But I'm here to tell you right now, if you want fruit in your life, friends, if you want beautiful fruit in your life, you get connected to Jesus Christ. Man, you hold on to him with everything you've got. The Bible tells us very clearly that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. And I'm telling you right now, maybe you lack self-control. You're impulsive. Everything that you think about, you just do. And you're like, how can I overcome this? You're not going to overcome it by doing things on your own. You're going to overcome it by getting close to the Lord. Because the problem is we are like branches that are on the ground. We are no longer connected to the vine, and you'll never see fruit on those branches, will you? Like they're dead, they're gone. Friends, some of you, you're a follower of Jesus Christ, but you quit hanging on to Jesus Christ and you wonder, why is my life fruitless? Why do I have no fruit? Why do I have no love and no joy and no peace in my life? Why do I have no patience? I'll tell you why. You quit hanging on to Jesus. But oh man, come on, when you hold on to Jesus, you cannot help help us start to love a little bit more. Man, you get desperate for Jesus. You get desperate for his word. You get on your knees and you're like, Lord, I need you today because on my own, I know that I will mess this thing up. Jesus, I need your grace and I need your help today, that you would help me to make good decisions. I'm gonna tell you right now, more often than not, you're going to find yourself in a place where you would normally say yes to those things that make you feel rotten inside. And you're going to say, no, I'm going Jesus' way. I'm going God's way. And before long, you start to grow. Before long, you start to blossom. Before long, you start to become the man or the woman that God has designed you to be right from the very beginning. Yeah, you are close. I guess I was wrong when I said today was going to be more of a teach. I'm a little fired up today if you haven't noticed. You guys, it's about life and death. And we're chasing after fruit that can only give us death. We're chasing after independence that can only give us death. Be dependent on God. Be dependent on Jesus Christ. Today I want to ask you, is today the day that you stop grasping for the wrong tree? And is today the day where you receive the tree of life that Jesus offers through the cross?